Okay, so you know how sometimes you watch an episode of Family Guy and you're like, wow, they really just did that. This is one of those episodes. I mean, the whole premise is Peter getting his dead uncle's HBO Max password, which, first off, is peak Peter. Like, of course, his first thought after a relative kicks the bucket isn't sadness, it's sweet, free streaming. And then they just decide to have a massive, chaotic Game of Thrones parody. And like usually, Family Guy parodies are pretty good, they hit the big beats, but this one felt like they just threw every got character and plot point into a blender with a bunch of random jokes and hit the puree button. I'm talking Jon Snow with a Jheri curl, Daenerys talking about being a person of color in Westeros, and a battle scene so dark you can't even see what's happening. It's the kind of episode that makes you question the writer's sanity, and honestly, the network executives who greenlit it. But hey, it's Family Guy, right? We're here for the chaos. And speaking of chaos, you're not going to believe the wild tangent they go on about Succession later. Stick around, because this episode is a roller coaster, and not necessarily in a good way, but definitely in a memorable way. Seriously, by the end of this thing, you'll be asking yourself, what did I just watch? And you're going to want to talk about it, which is why you should absolutely smash that subscribe button and ring the little bell so you don't miss out on any more deep dives into the madness. All right, so this episode, Season 20, Episode 14, kicks off with that classic, slightly depressing Family Guy intro song. You know the one, about how values are gone and stuff. And then Peter, in typical Peter fashion, announces his uncle just died. But instead of mourning, he's stoked because they get to use his HBO Max password. It's like the least sensitive thing ever, but also totally believable for Peter. They immediately dive into this Game of Thrones parody, and honestly, it's a wild ride from the get-go. We've got Jon Yellow Snow, who's rocking a Jheri curl, which is a choice. Then there's Queen Hearsay, who gets her news from a friend who heard from someone else, which is, you know, actual hearsay. It's funny how they use those simple concepts to explain the got plot, but then it just devolves into pure absurdity. The whole setup is basically Peter and the guys trying to figure out what to watch on HBO Max. They land on Game of Thrones, and the show immediately starts making fun of its own pacing and plot holes.
They joke about how America loved it for like 6.5 seasons, which is a pretty accurate jab at the later seasons. Then they start acting out scenes from GOT, but with Family Guy characters swapped in. Jon Yellow Snow, voiced by Peter, is apparently having issues after his trip to Mykonos, and he tries using a Timothée Chalamet mask. I mean, what does that even mean? It's like they just threw in random pop culture references and called it a day. We get Joe the Broken, who's apparently been playing Overwatch, which is another weirdly specific detail. And then there's this whole thing about Westeros having Joffrey as the new king, but he's fourth in line. His brothers, Jumpin', Follum, and Splat, all get killed off in seconds. It's this frantic, nonsensical way of showing the chaos of Succession in GOT, but dialed up to 11 with Family Guy's trademark disregard for logic. Then we've got Tyrion, or in this case, Uncle Doggian, who's just there to drink and know things. His knowledge about war is hilariously basic. War is bad, like really super bad. And then he starts listing war tactics like front lines and flanking, and somehow they get to planking. It's the kind of rapid-fire, non-sequitur humor that Family Guy excels at, but it also feels a little bit like they're just grabbing at straws to make jokes. The introduction of Daenerys Targaryen is another high point, where she's suddenly this person of color who's surprised to see other people of color in Westeros. And the way they handle that conversation, with Peter's awkward attempt at wokeness, is classic Family Guy. It's poking fun at representation in media, but in a way that's both funny and slightly uncomfortable. And then, of course, the White Walkers show up, or rather a guy asking for Tommy Bahama beach chairs. It's this brilliant subversion of the epic threat of the White Walkers, turning it into a mundane, everyday problem. And the battle itself? It's exactly what you'd expect from a Family Guy parody of the Battle of Winterfell. It's dark, chaotic, and nobody can see what's going on. They even joke about people blaming bad TVs. The whole thing is just a meta-commentary on the actual show and the complaints people had about its visuals. After the GOT debacle, they switch gears to Succession, and this part is just as bizarre, but in a different way. Peter, as Logan Roy, is this powerful media mogul who can't find a sport coat that fits. And the whole, I'm feeling great, I've got 30 years left, while clearly being on his deathbed, pure Family Guy. The kids fighting over the company, the ridiculous gifts, it all plays into the absurdity of wealth and power. The idea of him deciding who gets the company based on who pees on carpets and then giving it to He-Man because he likes helicopters, it's just insane. Then we get this weird musical number where they sing about Pea Stream Industries. It's supposed to be a parody of a country duet, but it just ends up being about pee.
And the fact that Peter decides to stay because he likes P and he's going to run it with Big Bird, it's the kind of nonsensical ending that leaves you scratching your head. The show then pivots again to Big Little Lies, and this is where things get really strange. Peter is dressed as Audrey Hepburn, and Chris is dressed as Elvis. They're having a picnic, and it's all very pastel. The dialogue about being poor and liking people because they're poor feels like a twisted commentary on social class. And then Quagmire shows up with his daughter Boise, named after a gentrified city, and Jacksonville, named after another one. It's this whole commentary on how people brand themselves and their kids with trendy, but ultimately meaningless names. The whole Big Little Lies parody feels like it's trying to comment on the superficiality of the show, the relationships, and the way people present themselves. The scene with the kids arguing about Teslas and bullying is a good example of how Family Guy takes a real-world issue and blows it up to ridiculous proportions. The characters are trying to be sincere with their hand over their heart, which is such a funny little detail. Then we get to the end, where Peter is looking for a better show and chooses Big Little Lies. The whole Audrey Hepburn and Elvis thing is Peter's idea of dressing like a woman, which is somehow supposed to be funny. The dialogue about pooping and rolling in it and the whole Monterey 5 callback feels like they're trying to tie it all together, but it's still incredibly disjointed. The episode ends with them talking about Burger King crowns and Whopper Jr. sizes, which is such a random detail to end on. It's like they had a bunch of random jokes and sketches and just glued them together, hoping something would stick. Overall, this episode is a prime example of Family Guy at its most chaotic and least coherent. It's a barrage of references, parodies, and absurd jokes that don't always land, but when they do, they're hilariously bizarre. It's the kind of episode that you watch, shake your head, and then immediately want to talk to someone about.
It's not a classic, but it's definitely memorable for all the wrong, and sometimes right, reasons. So this episode is basically a fever dream disguised as a TV episode. It's Peter's dead uncle's HBO Max password that sparks this whole adventure. They jump from a Game of Thrones parody that feels like it was written by someone who only saw the first 6 seasons and then got distracted by a shiny object, to a Succession parody where Peter tries to decide who gets his company by making them pee on carpets. And then they inexplicably morph into a Big Little Lies parody that feels, well, like Family Guy trying to do Big Little Lies. The Game of Thrones part is where they're making fun of how dark the battle scenes are, and honestly, they nail that. It's so dark you can't see anything. They even joke that it's because people have bad TVs. Jon Snow is rocking a Jheri curl, which is a visual gag that just keeps on giving. Tyrion's version, Uncle Doggian, just drinks and knows things, and his profound wisdom about war is that it's bad, like really super bad. It's this perfectly dumbed-down take on complex themes. And then you have Daenerys, who's somehow confused about being a person of color in Westeros. It's a weird attempt at social commentary, but it's delivered with such a lack of subtlety, it's almost funny. The Succession parody is equally bonkers. Peter, as Logan Roy, is dying, but insists he's got 30 years left. His kids are all vying for control, and the gifts they bring are ridiculous. He-Man gets the company because Peter likes helicopters. It's the kind of logic that only makes sense in a Family Guy episode. And then there's the musical number about Pea Stream Industries that's literally just about peeing. It's so stupid, it loops back around to being funny. The Big Little Lies part is where things get really, really weird. Peter is dressed as Audrey Hepburn, and Chris is dressed as Elvis. They're having some sort of existential picnic about being poor. And then Quagmire shows up with his kids, Boise and Jacksonville, named after gentrified cities. It's a sharp, if a little mean, jab at how people try to seem sophisticated by naming their kids after places. The whole sequence feels like a fever dream, with random characters popping in and out and nonsensical dialogue. They're talking about Teslas and bullying, and it all just dissolves into more random gags. The episode doesn't really have a cohesive story. It's more like a series of sketches loosely tied together by the HBO Max password premise. Each segment feels like it's trying to outdo the last in terms of sheer absurdity. And honestly, by the end, you're just left wondering what the point was. It's not like they're making any profound statements about society or television. They're just throwing jokes at the wall and seeing what sticks. The writing quality is, as usual for Family Guy, a mixed bag. Some jokes land perfectly, while others fall completely flat. The pacing is all over the place, jumping from one parody to another without much transition. Visually, it's standard Family Guy animation, nothing too groundbreaking. But the sheer ambition of trying to parody 3 different shows in one episode is, I guess, commendable in a weird way. My personal verdict? It's an okay episode. It's not the worst thing they've ever done, but it's far from the best. It's one of those episodes that you'll probably forget about a week after you watch it, unless you're really into deep-cutting TV parodies. Let's talk about the Game of Thrones parody first, because that's the big chunk of this episode. So, Peter, as Jon Yellow Snow, I should say, is out there with his Jheri curl looking all confused. And his sister, Queen Hersey, gets news through the grapevine, literally because her friend told her. It's a funny way to explain the whole rumor mill thing in Westeros. Then Joe, or Joe the Broken, shows up, and he's apparently been playing Overwatch. It's such a random detail for a Game of Thrones character, but that's Family Guy for you. They'll take a fantasy world and inject modern-day references like it's nothing. The whole Joffrey succession thing is pure chaos. Jump in, follow him, splat, gone in seconds. It's a dark comedic take on how brutal that world can be, but it's also so fast that it's hard to even register. And then you have Uncle Doggian, who's basically Tyrion, with his whole I drink and I know things. His knowledge of war is limited. He knows it's bad and then gets distracted by the word planking. It's a perfect example of how Family Guy takes recognizable characters and strips them down to their most basic, idiotic traits. Daenerys showing up and being shocked to find other people of color in Westeros is such a weirdly specific social commentary. It's like they're acknowledging the criticism of GOT's lack of diversity, but doing it in the most Family Guy way possible, which is to say, awkwardly and then immediately pivoting to something else. And the White Walkers showing up as guys looking for Tommy Bahama chairs is pure gold.
It completely deflates the tension of the actual threat and turns it into a suburban dad problem. The battle scene itself is intentionally terrible. It's so dark you can't see anything, and they directly address it in the dialogue, saying it's because people have bad TVs. It's a meta joke about how audiences complained about the actual Battle of Winterfell. They throw in effects that are supposed to be expensive and groundbreaking, but all you see is darkness and confusion. Then we shift to Succession. Peter is Logan Roy, but he's apparently not even that old, claiming he has 30 more years. His kids are all there, ready to fight over the company. The gifts are hilarious, especially the Nintendo Switch and the actual helicopter for Logan. And the final straw is the accidental carpet whiz, which makes him decide to give the company away. It's such a convoluted way to get to the point, but that's what makes it funny. The musical number about Pea Stream Industries is so stupid. It's supposed to be a country duet, but it's just about peeing. And the fact that Peter decides to stay and run the company with Big Bird is the perfect punchline to that whole bizarre segment. It's like, what was the point of all that? And the answer is, there isn't one, and that's the joke. Then we get into the big Little Lies parody, and this is where the episode really goes off the rails in the best and worst ways. Peter as Audrey Hepburn, Chris as Elvis. It's a visual gag that's immediately unsettling. The dialogue about being poor and liking people for it is actually kind of poignant, but then it gets twisted. Quagmire's kids, Boise and Jacksonville, named after gentrified cities, is a really sharp observation about how people brand themselves. The whole idea of Chris and Peter becoming a team, holding hands as a joke, and then the mention of Joe having soft-focused shower sex with his abusive wife, it's just a string of increasingly uncomfortable and bizarre scenarios. It's like they're cramming as much weirdness into this parody as possible. The scene where Boise gets bullied about her dad's cheap Tesla is a good example of how they take modern anxieties and turn them into comedic fodder. It's about the pressure to have the latest and greatest, even for your car. And the whole thing with the hand over the heart for sincerity is a little detail that adds to the overall absurdity. The conversation about Burger King crowns and Whopper Jr. sizes is such a random, mundane detail to focus on. It's like they're trying to find humor in the everyday, but it just feels like filler. And then the whole brioches and backstory beach line. It's just nonsense for the sake of nonsense. It's a sprawling, messy episode that throws a lot at the wall. Some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. It's not a tightly plotted story, but if you're looking for a barrage of jokes and parodies, you might find something to enjoy here. This episode is, frankly, a mess, but it's a Family Guy mess, which means it's often hilarious because of its sheer audacity. We start with Peter getting his uncle's HBO Max password, which is already a perfectly Peter-esque way to begin an episode. From there, it's a whirlwind of parodies, starting with a Game of Thrones bit that's both incredibly specific and hilariously broad. They nail the darkness of that infamous battle scene, making a joke about how no one could see it anyway. Jon Snow has a Jheri curl because why not? Tyrion's equivalent just drinks and knows things, and his deep insight into war is that it's bad. It's this kind of dumbed-down, almost childlike understanding of complex topics that makes Family Guy's parodies work. Daenerys shows up, and the gag about her being surprised by the diversity in Westeros is a clever, if blunt, way of addressing criticisms of the original show. The White Walkers are reduced to asking about Tommy Bahama chairs, completely deflating the epic threat. Then we get this Succession parody, and it's pure chaos. Peter as Logan Roy is supposedly on his deathbed, but claims he has years left. His kids are all scrambling for power, and the gifts are absurd. He-Man wins the company because Peter likes helicopters. The musical number about Pea Stream Industries is a surprisingly catchy, incredibly stupid song about peeing. It's the kind of joke that makes you groan and laugh at the same time. The Big Little Lies parody that follows is perhaps the weirdest segment. Peter's dressed as Audrey Hepburn, Chris has Elvis, and they're having this existential picnic about poverty. Quagmire's daughters, Boise and Jacksonville, named after gentrified cities, is a particularly biting social commentary disguised as a gag. The episode piles on the bizarre interactions, like Joe's description of his marital life and the whole bullying incident with the Teslas. It's this relentless barrage of jokes, references, and character interactions that don't always cohere, but often provide moments of genuine, albeit dark, humor. The writing for this episode feels like a shotgun blast. They're trying to hit multiple targets with one story, and they don't always succeed. The transitions between parodies are jarring, and the pacing feels uneven. Some jokes land with a thud, while others are surprisingly clever. Visually, it's standard Family Guy fare, so don't expect any animation miracles. But the energy and the sheer willingness to go to absurd places are what make it watchable. My overall assessment? It's a chaotic, uneven, but ultimately entertaining episode. It's not a masterpiece, but it's a solid example of Family Guy's brand of humor. It's the kind of episode that, despite its flaws, you'll probably remember for its sheer ridiculousness. All right, let's break down some of the absolute insanity that went down in this episode. First up, we have the entire Game of Thrones parody. So Peter, as Jon Yellow Snow, is rocking this Jheri curl. I mean, that's the first thing that hits you. It's so out of left field, but it works because it's just so unexpected. And then his twin sister, Queen Hersey, gets her news from a friend who heard from someone else. This is such a perfect, simple explanation of how gossip and rumors spread, and it's applied to this epic fantasy setting. It's like these massive political machinations are all based on people just talking. It's brilliant in its simplicity. Then we have Joe the Broken, who's just chilling playing Overwatch. Imagine Tyrion Lannister taking a break from scheming to play some competitive shooter. It's the juxtaposition of these high-stakes fantasy characters with mundane, modern hobbies that makes these parodies so funny. And the fact that he's Joe the Broken and not just Joe is another layer of weirdness. Then there's the Joffrey succession. Jumpin', Fallum, Splat, all dead within seconds. It's a visual gag that's so over the top that it's hilarious. It perfectly captures the brutality of the GOT world, but in a way that's completely absurd. It's not just killing them off, it's the speed and the lack of ceremony. It's like, yep, they're dead, next. And it's meant to show how easily power shifts in that world, but in Family Guy's exaggerated style. Uncle Doggian, the Tyrion stand-in, and his whole I drink and I know things routine is classic. But then when he tries to talk about war, it's just, war is bad, like really super bad. And then he gets confused by planking. It's a hilarious deconstruction of Tyrion's intelligence. He's supposed to be the smart one, but here he's reduced to a few catchphrases and a misunderstanding of basic modern terms.
It makes you wonder if the writers really understood Tyrion, or if they just grabbed the most recognizable traits. The Daenerys moment, where she's surprised to see people of color in Westeros, is a really interesting, if awkward, piece of social commentary. It acknowledges the lack of diversity in the original show. But the delivery, with Peter's voice and Peter's usual lack of tact, makes it uncomfortable. It's that Family Guy tightrope walk between being sharp and being offensive. And then the White Walkers just asking about Tommy Bahama chairs? It's the perfect anticlimax. The biggest threat in the entire goatee universe is reduced to a mundane consumer question. It's a fantastic way to poke fun at the show's attempts at creating an epic threat. Moving on to the Succession parody, Peter as Logan Roy. The line where he says he feels great and has 30 years left, right after you know he's supposed to be dying, is such a good fake-out. It sets up this whole power struggle, but with this underlying silliness. And the gifts are amazing. He-Man getting the company because Peter likes helicopters? It's so random and specific. It's the kind of detail that makes you laugh because it makes absolutely no sense.
And then the accidental carpet whiz leading to him giving the company away, it's a ridiculous trigger for such a massive decision. The Pea Stream Industries song is pure genius in its stupidity. It's supposed to be a country duet, but it's just about peeing. The lyrics are so simple and so focused on one thing. And Peter's decision to stay and run it with Big Bird, who's now at HBO, is the ultimate punchline. It's a bizarre, nonsensical ending that perfectly encapsulates the episode's chaotic nature. Now for the Big Little Lies parody, which is arguably the most surreal part. Peter dressed as Audrey Hepburn, Chris as Elvis. It's a visual that just sticks with you. The picnic scene, the dialogue about being poor and liking people for it, it's actually kind of profound before it gets twisted into something weird. And Quagmire's daughters, Boise and Jacksonville, are such a perfect jab at parents who name their kids after trendy, gentrified places. It's like, oh, you think that sounds sophisticated? It's a really sharp observation. Joe's mention of soft-focused shower sex with his abusive wife is another one of those moments where Family Guy just goes for it. It's dark, it's uncomfortable, and it's exactly what you'd expect from them. And the bullying scene with the Teslas is brilliant.
It takes this modern status symbol and turns it into a source of insecurity and bullying. It highlights how even the wealthy have their own hierarchies and anxieties. The hand-over-heart sincerity thing is such a small detail, but it adds to the overall meta-commentary on how people perform authenticity. The Burger King conversation is another example of them finding humor in the mundane. It's a detailed discussion about Whopper Jr. sizes and crowns. It's the kind of conversation that in real life would be boring, but they make it funny through sheer absurdity. And then you have brioches and Backstory Beach. It's just wordplay and nonsense that's designed to make you question reality. It's like they're deliberately trying to confuse you with their vocabulary. My personal take on all these moments? The Got parody is the strongest, mostly because it leans into the absurdity of the source material so well. The Succession part is good for the sheer unpredictability of its plot. But the Big Little Lies section, while undeniably strange, feels a bit unfocused. It's like they had a few good ideas for that parody, but they couldn't quite tie them together. Still, it's the kind of episode that gives you plenty to talk about, even if half of it makes no sense. Let's talk about the characters and how they fared in this episode. Peter, as usual, is the driving force of the chaos. His transition from mourning his uncle to exploiting his HBO Max password is classic Peter. He doesn't change as a character, but he certainly provides the catalyst for all the madness. His Jon Yellow Snow is a highlight, mostly for the visual gag of the Jheri curl, but also for his signature Peterness being overlaid onto a dramatic character. He's just Peter, but in a wig. His Logan Roy is also a good imitation, leaning into the gruff, powerful patriarch trope with a Family Guy twist. He's not evolving, just occupying different roles for the sake of parody. Chris, bless his heart, is mostly along for the ride. His Elvis in the Big Little Lies parody is a visual joke, and his role in the Got parody is minimal. He's there to be part of the family, and maybe get a weird character trait thrown his way. His interaction with Peter during the Big Little Lies section about being poor and liking people for it is actually one of his more developed moments, even if it's twisted. It's not changing how I see him, but it shows he can still deliver a line when given the right material. Meg is practically non-existent in this episode, which is probably for the best. She's often relegated to the sidelines or used for a quick, uninspired joke. Here, she's just not there. It's a sign that her character hasn't really gone anywhere in this episode, and probably won't in the grand scheme of things unless the writers have a sudden burst of inspiration. Stewie, like Meg, is largely sidelined, but he does have a small moment where he expresses interest in Big Bird being at HBO. It's a subtle nod to the evolving media landscape, but not much else. His primary function here is to be part of the family unit, not to drive the plot. He's not changing or growing, just existing. Brian is also pretty quiet for most of the episode, mostly appearing in the intro and then popping up in the Got parody as, well, whoever he was supposed to be. He's the slightly more intelligent one, but even he gets swept up in the absurdity. His presence doesn't significantly impact the episode's narrative or my perception of him. He's just the talking dog, reacting to the insanity. Joe is Joe. He's the cop, he's broken, he's playing Overwatch. His biggest contribution is the meta-commentary on his own character and the show's tendency to make him pathetic. His brief mention of soft-focused shower sex with his abusive wife is a darkly funny glimpse into his personal life, but it doesn't necessarily change how we see him, just adds another layer to his already well-established misery.
Quagmire is Quagmire, but with a twist. Naming his daughters Boise and Jacksonville is a brilliant, biting observation about parental naming trends. It's a moment that actually shows some sharp writing for his character, making him more than just a pervert. It gives him a specific, albeit weird, motivation and a point of commentary. It's a nice little addition that shows the writers can still find new angles for him. Lois is mostly a background player, the voice of reason that is consistently ignored. She's present, she's reacting, but she's not driving any of the plot forward. She's the anchor that keeps Peter from floating away entirely, but she doesn't have any significant character moments herself in this particular episode. Overall, the characters here are mostly serving the parodies. They don't really grow or change, but they do get to embody different archetypes for comedic effect. It's less about character development and more about using familiar faces in unfamiliar, ridiculous situations. The show seems to be comfortable with these characters as they are, just putting them through the ringer for laughs.
Okay, so let's dig into some of the hidden gems and Easter eggs in this episode, because Family Guy is always packed with them. The most obvious one, and the one that's practically screaming at you, is the entire Game of Thrones parody. But beyond the surface-level jokes about Jon Snow's Jheri curl or Tyrion's drinking, there's the subtle jab at the show's pacing and darkness. The fact that they joke about the battle scene being too dark and people blaming their TVs is a direct callback to a very real criticism of the actual show. It shows the writers are not just parodying the plot, but the fan reception and the production issues too. It's a deeper level of commentary. Then there's the Succession parody, and Peter's insistence on having 30 years left, while clearly being on his way out. This is a classic trope in Succession itself, the aging patriarch clinging to power. But here, it's twisted into Peter's typical denial of reality. And the gifts his kids bring, He-Man, the helicopter, are not just random. They're a commentary on the ridiculous excess and the often absurd ways people try to curry favor with powerful figures. It's like they're poking fun at the show's portrayal of extreme wealth and power dynamics. In the Big Little Lies parody, Quagmire naming his daughters Boise and Jacksonville is a brilliant, biting social commentary. It's a reference to the trend of parents naming their children after hip, gentrified cities. It's a subtle way of saying that these names, while intended to sound sophisticated, are ultimately a bit of a poser. It's a dig at consumer culture and the performative aspects of modern parenting. Most people might just think it's a funny name, but it's actually a pretty sharp observation. And the mention of Joe having soft-focused shower sex with my abusive wife, that's a deep cut. It's referencing the often bleak and disturbing psychological elements that are hinted at in shows like Big Little Lies. Family Guy usually keeps things lighter, but here they're leaning into the darker, more unsettling aspects of relationship dynamics that the original show explores. It's a bold choice for them to go there. Then there's the whole Pea Stream Industries song. It's a parody of a country duet, which is a genre often associated with heartfelt storytelling and simple themes, but they completely subvert it by making the entire song about peeing. It's a classic Family Guy move. Take something familiar and twist it into something utterly ridiculous.
The jaunty piano music contrasting with the crude lyrics is part of the humor. It's the contrast between the expected sentimentality and the actual vulgarity. Finally, the whole Big Bird is at HBO Now line. It's a funny meta-joke about the consolidation of media and how even childhood icons end up in different corporate portfolios. It ties into the larger theme of media consumption and ownership that the episode touches on with its HBO Max premise. It's a small detail, but it adds to the overall commentary on the media landscape. These are the kinds of jokes that show the writers are paying attention to more than just the surface of these shows. So what if they did things differently? Let's say, for the Game of Thrones part, instead of just making Jon Snow have a Jheri curl, they actually gave him some of Peter's classic lines. Imagine Jon Snow saying, "This is worse than that time I cut myself shaving." It would ground the parody more in Peter's character and make it funnier. Or for the Succession part, what if the gifts weren't just random items, but actual things that mirrored the absurdities of the show? Like, instead of He-Man, one of the kids brings a whole fake news network to impress Logan. That would be a more direct jab at the show's themes of media manipulation. And for the Big Little Lies parody, instead of just having Peter as Audrey Hepburn and Chris as Elvis, what if they actually mimicked specific scenes from the show, but with Family Guy characters? Like, imagine Lois as Nicole Kidman having a full-on breakdown, but instead of therapy, she's screaming about how Peter ate the last slice of pizza. It would make the parody more targeted and less like a general impression.
The current version feels a little bit like they're just using the names and general vibe of the shows without fully committing to the parody. They should have leaned harder into the specific character archetypes and dramatic beats of each show they were mocking. The current episode is a definite 6.8 out of 10. It gets points for ambition, attempting to juggle 3 major parodies. The goatee and Succession bits land some solid laughs, especially the visual gags and the meta-commentary on the shows themselves. However, the Big Little Lies section feels a bit tacked on and unfocused, and the overall narrative cohesion is, as expected with Family Guy, non-existent. It's an episode for the fans who love deep cuts and rapid-fire jokes, not for those looking for a cohesive story.
The thing that would have pushed this score higher is a stronger, more consistent link between the parodies. If there was a narrative thread, however thin, that connected the goatee chaos to the Succession power struggle and then to the Big Little Lies drama, it would have felt more like a complete episode rather than a collection of sketches. It's a shame, because the potential for a truly brilliant meta-commentary on TV itself was there, but it got lost in the shuffle of jokes. It reminds me a lot of the early days of Family Guy, where they would just throw everything at the wall and see what stuck. But these days, it feels a little more formulaic, even in its chaos. So while this episode has its moments of brilliance, it ultimately feels like a missed opportunity, a wild ride that's a little too bumpy and a little too short on destination. It's the kind of episode that makes you appreciate the tighter, more focused ones, but also reminds you why you keep watching Family Guy in the first place, because you never know what kind of bizarre thing they're going to come up with next, even if it's just to mock how dark a battle scene can be.